Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tiger Tank 12, have any call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we're today reviewing the WZ-120, Chinese tier 9 medium tank that is really interesting because it has several things that not a lot of other tanks have. And it goes into the extremes in several different categories. We're going to talk about this, and obviously afterwards we're going to have some gameplay, two very saucy gameplays, and a final verdict. I think what you can hear out of my voice is that I really like this tank already. This is a vehicle that I enjoy a lot. And when I first started playing the WZ-120, I didn't really expect a lot. I didn't expect it to only have 3 degrees of gun depression, but here we are. This is a tank that really should get at least a look into if you like medium tanks. And if you think that it's not worth it, maybe give it a second shot, because there are quite a few things that you have to know before you get going in the WZ-120. Before we go into the full characteristics, let us real quick take a look at all of the things you have to actually unlock. There's a lot of things. There are 2 engines, one of them having 600 horsepower, which is actually not worth it at the start. So definitely do not go for the top engine, the tier 10 engine over there. Just go for the 150 LS engine, which only improves, well, it still improves the engine power by 60 horsepower, but the improvement from the LS to the LT engine is minuscule, so you can basically ignore that for the beginning. What you should go for is certainly the 122mm gun. You have 4 guns on this vehicle. One of them you'll start with, it's the 59-100T gun, which is on a T34-2, and then you have a tier 9 100mm gun with some very bad characteristics. Penetration is terrible, the rate of fire is pretty bad, the accuracy isn't that great. You want to get past them as quickly as you can. You want to get the upgrade turret, because the upgrade turret is very powerful. And then finally you get to some better guns. Now the other 100mm gun, which you can use on the WZ-120, but which I would still not suggest using, it has better penetration, but it still kind of lacks the speciality, the special feature of the Chinese medium tank line, and that is the high alpha 122mm gun. This is the final piece of equipment that you'll have to go through with the guns, and unfortunately, to be able to get this gun, you'll have to unlock all of the prior guns and the turret. So this is going to be a very important module that you have to get, and the way to this module is already quite expensive. 59,000 experience coming in from, you know, one gun for 45,000, an additional 23,000 for the WZ's turret. So you're already going to be looking down at about 70k, and then an additional 59,000 for the 100mm gun. You're going to be looking at about 200,000 experience, more than 200,000 experience with the tracks to get the 122mm gun. So it will take a while, and it means that this tank will not be fully upgraded for quite a while before you're actually able to play the fully upgraded version. Unfortunately, and very sadly, this is the way that the old tanks used to work, the Tech 3 vehicles, and you'll have to go through this suffering if you want to get this gun. And this gun is worth it, let me tell you that. You have 440 alpha, which is very nice for a medium tank at tier 9. That is impressive. 249mm of penetration with AP shells. 3 different shell types: AP, high explosive anti-tank, and high explosive shells. All of them have the same shell velocity, 950mm, but they all have different penetration values, as you expect. And you can see the penetration values for the AP shell on the standard round is pretty impressive, 249mm. On the heat shell, you're running around with whopping 340mm of penetration. And even the high explosive shell isn't that bad, 68mm is still decent enough. So you're going to have quite a nice selection of rounds that you can choose from when you're playing the WZ-120. The rate of fire is also not too bad. Because of the high alpha damage and the decent rate of fire, you get a very good DPM on this vehicle. One of the biggest downsides though that you have to face on the WZ-120 is the 3 degrees of gun depression that you have on this vehicle. If you would be using the 100mm gun, I am pretty certain that you would not have 3 degrees of gun depression. 3 degrees of gun depression is the worst kind of gun depression you can have on any tank, and that is one of the major downsides to the WZ-120. But it's not a deal breaker. Not exactly, not immediately. Listen to me, like, trust me on this one. This tank is actually very good, even with this major handicap. I think it would certainly be time to give this tank 6 degrees of gun depression, because it would certainly fit the, it would fit the time much better. And I would look forward to Wargaming to actually implement 6 degrees of gun depression, because I think that would be very fair. That would make the WZ-120 probably one of the best tier 9 medium tanks in the game. 46.59 degrees per second. Traverse speed is pretty good. Dispersion and aim time are on the worst side. You certainly want to have a fully trained crew. You want to have certain field modifications to get this tank up to speed. But even without the field modifications, if you use premium consumables, for example, the dispersion can be whittled down to 0.33 without any extra equipment. So, moving on to survivability, it's another strength for this vehicle. Very, very good turret armor, very good hull armor. 80mm on the side, 100 at the front, 45 at the rear, 220 at the front of the turret, 160 on the side, and 65 at the back. Now, the cupolas on top of the vehicle actually are quite prevalent. You can see them quite easily if you're close to them, so it's going to be a major weak spot. But you also have 1,750 HP. For a medium tank at tier 9, that is pretty damn impressive. That is on the level of the E75, the AMX 5120. Look at that. This is a tier 9 heavy tank that needs some work, probably. And it actually does not have more HP than the WZ-120. This armor will actually save your life quite a lot of times. So the armor is really reliable. Very well armored medium tank. Moving on to mobility, another very good point on this vehicle. Now with turbo, you can get the engine power up all the way to 686 and with field modifications. This allows your vehicle to be much faster in acceleration, and 65 kilometers per hour top speed is pretty damn impressive. The only problem is that the 18.29 horsepower per ton, they are not the very best in the class. If you go over to the CS59, you can see that the CS59 has better horsepower per ton. The Skoda T50 obviously has much better horsepower per ton, but it also doesn't have the armor. The CS59 also doesn't have the same kind of armor that the WZ-120 has, so I think it's a fair trade-off. Tank itself doesn't weigh too much. It has very good traverse speed of 56.19. That is with a lot of skills that I have on my crew and field modifications. And generally speaking, I think the tank itself is already pretty damn good in being concealed. Now I do have the second specialty slot of view range or anything regarding scouting equipment. This is going to give you quite a boost in the view range department. The tank itself in stock or base view range is at 390 meters, which isn't the worst, but it's also not the best at tier 9, but I think you can work with that. I went with the Coated Optics Class 1, I went with Turbo Class 1, and with the Vertical Stabilizer Class 1. I would highly suggest you to use the Vertical Stabilizer Class 1. I really like to have the best view range and the best mobility, so for me, this is pretty much the ideal setup for any kind of scenario. But obviously, if you are preferring a very aggressive take on the game, you could even improve the armor on the tank more with improved hardening. You could get the armor slot in there. Then you could go with gun rammer. and vertical stabilizer at last. That would improve your firepower. It would make you a very aggressive up-close medium tank, which still has 60 kph. But it loses the specific power to weight ratio or the boost that you get there. But other than that, it would keep pretty close to what you have already. It would just improve the firepower, and you would be at 421 meters view range. If you then also run improved rations, for example, which I'm going to be doing real quick right here, you're going to have 441 meters view range. Your DPM is going to go up even further, and your dispersion is going to down as if you would have, you know, equipment for that. So generally speaking, there are a lot of ways you can actually upgrade this tank. I think coated optics, I just really like to be able to see for myself, not have to be dependent on other players. And even with premium consumables, I would be at 492 meters 492 meters view range, which I wouldn't need. And then I would probably say I would just go with a gun rammer, and, you know, improve that if I can. But if you already have the option to use a scouting slot, why not go for it? So that's what I did. This tank itself, you know, you can play it like a little scout if you want to. This is the setup that I had the most success with and the most fun as well. So let me go over to the field modifications real fast and go through them before we move on over to the gameplay. I went with light alloy mounting points because the times that my tank has been immobilized or the gun has been destroyed has been quite rare. Immobilized has happened more often than not, but the gun and the ammo rack being destroyed, that hasn't happened that often. If it happens, I usually repair it, so I don't really care too much about it. Improved sight, I went with, I pretty much went with improved sight for better accuracy, anti-reflective coating because I have 21 kph in reverse. That's more than enough for me. And finally, now I'm thinking about either going for more view range and sacrificing a little bit of the top speed, or going for more top speed and sacrificing the view range. Generally speaking, for me, getting more top speed doesn't really help me because the tank itself is already pretty limited in being able to reach the 65 kph. That's only something you'll be able to do when you're going downhill. So I'd rather take a cut in the top speed by 2 kph and gain an additional, I'm not even sure, what is it, 3% in view range. So now I have 506 meters view range on the vehicle, which will allow me to outspot certain tanks in certain positions. I usually play this tank quite aggressively. I think having more view range is certainly going to help me out. So why the hell not? This is how I would set up my WZ-120, but obviously tell me what you guys would pick on the equipment, what you would choose. And I'm going to go over to the gameplay, show you 2 games that I had, and then we'll have the final verdict where we can talk a little bit about if this tank is worth the time or not, because it only has 3 degrees of gun depression, but there's a lot more to be had with the WZ-120. So stick with me where we're going over to the gameplay real fast. So I have 2 gameplays prepared for you guys. Hopefully both are not too long, but we're gonna have that and then the final verdict. You can see the old setup I was running on this vehicle. I was using the enhanced gun lane drive, which you really don't need to have anymore, but I still had it on because I played this tank before Equipment 2.0 hit the live server. So that one used to be the old school equipment that you would pick, and now everyone is laughing at me for using it. And I had like 20 of them lying around, and I sold the majority of them. So now we're playing on Cliff, and you can see a majority of the enemies are tier 8 vehicles and just a couple of tier 9 vehicles. This is a perfect matchup because this is a game where you have a lot of armor, a lot of HP you can take care of, and you don't have to worry about tier 10 tanks. That doesn't mean that this tank is not capable of fighting tier 10 tanks, but it is actually really, really powerful at tier 9, and I'm going to show you guys what I mean with that. We pen the object 7.7 version 2, and we take a big chunk of his HP. Now this is the beauty of this tank, probably one of the main selling points, being able to do that amount of damage with a single shot. 460 alpha, that's something you'll be seeing quite often because this tank just has really, really good alpha damage. And that's something that really sells the Chinese medium tank line. You only have 3 degrees of gun depression though, which is a real bad thing. It's probably the worst attribute to the tank, and a thing that a lot of players cannot overlook. But I think that if you give it a little bit of a chance and you work out certain places where you can go and certain places where you cannot go, it still works out in your favor. Because right there, even with just 3 degrees of gun depression, I think because we're such a low profile tank, we much rather were using gun elevation in that angle because we're in a little dip than gun depression, and it wasn't that bad for us. But look at that beauty. 2 hits on the A phase 1. Both of the hits together combined, we did about 900 damage, and that's just a very beautiful thing to do. This Renegade doesn't stand a chance. We have 249 millimeters of penetration on the AP shell, and you know, these guys can't do anything against us in this position because our turret armor is fairly strong. And the accuracy of the gun isn't too bad either. If you have the field modifications, you have everything upgraded, and even are running like certain equipment that helps you out, like vertical stabilizer, I think this tank is incredibly powerful in close to mid-range engagements and sometimes even longer range fights. And if you think about it, 950 meters per second shell velocity is not the best. It's probably, you know, not the most impressive. But I think it's just, you know, good enough for you to work out. You just have to have a little bit of aim, you know, a little bit of knowledge how to pre-aim. And then, generally speaking, you're going to have a pretty damn good time. Even the heat shells have the same shell velocity, so you don't have like a massive drop-off with the heat shells, and they have 340 millimeters of high explosive, or 340 millimeters of penetration with the high explosive anti-tank ammunition, so that's pretty damn impressive. Now, view range, on the other hand, isn't too bad either. 390 meters base view range. If you have the upgraded version, if you have everything upgraded, as I mentioned, you can run with coated optics. I'm certainly at the moment at like 490 meters view range with coated optics. I think the rate of fire on this tank is already fairly high. If you want to use the rammer to get a better DPM, even better, you certainly can do that, but I think that I'm currently very happy with my loadout. I'm very happy with my tank. I can even spot if I have to in certain situations because the tank itself isn't that large. It's quite a low profile tank. You can hide it inside of bushes without a problem, and I've had some quite enjoyable experiences. Doing damage with this tank is fairly easy, and it just, you know, it's a lot of fun to hit tanks for 400 damage with a single shot. Right there is an E75. I'm hoping for him to be overextending himself to, you know, move out here and get himself into a little bit of trouble. He does hit our turret, and I think goes right through our cupola. But unfortunately for us, our second shot there doesn't go through the E75, and our IS-3/2 just gets penetrated by artillery on the rear deck and takes a massive 700 damage hit. But as you can see, well, if you have a little bit of aim, things would be a lot better. I am sitting out here in front of the 75. He is running the 105mm gun, but you have to be careful. Your armor is very powerful. It's very strong in the right situation, but if you're sitting out on a E75 like that, that strength, that power, that armor protection is probably not going to be, it's not going to protect you from the incoming 105mm shell rounds, even the 128 if he has that. But either way, we're still at 874 HP because the tank has a very nice 1700 HP, and we unfortunately have an AFK Emil 2. Now the issue right now is that our HP on the enemy team and our team is slowly getting closer to one another, and we're slowly but surely losing a little bit of the incentive that we had prior. But you can see snapshotting on this tank also works. It's very similar to a Soviet tank, but just with the Chinese 122mm penetration and with a very nice premium shell. I mean, I cannot stress enough how much of an improvement it is to have a heat shell as a secondary shell instead of an APCR shell that, you know, gives you maybe 50 or 60 millimeters more penetration, but it's not going to help you against tanks that have massive armor, and that you can only really penetrate with that 340 millimeters of penetration, and where you can really hit the flat surfaces. It makes this tank very flexible in a lot of situations, but at the same time, the 3 degrees of gun depression kind of takes away that flexibility a bit more. What I would really like to see, what would make this tank incredibly powerful, would be a buff to 6 degrees of gun depression instead of the 3 degrees that you have currently. If you have 6 degrees of gun depression, it would be like the T-34-3, which has 6.5 degrees of gun depression. This tank would be incredibly strong with that. Because right now, the gun is incredibly strong, the vehicle itself is fairly competent, fairly strong. The only thing you're lacking right now is that gun depression to make everything like rounded out. But I still enjoy this tank very much. You just have to know where to go, know when to strike, know which maps, which places on the map you can actually push and which you cannot. And if you can kind of distinguish that, you're going to have a much better experience with the WZ-120. As we are finally taking out the T-103, a tank with 1,250 HP, just about lost 2/3 with 2 very quick hits, and I'm taking a hit right here because I want to finish him off. He rolls at 384. We knock him out with 344 because it's the last remaining HP he still has. And now we're at 5,000 damage dealt. That is something you'll notice quite often, that you're going to be running with a lot of damage, because when you're firing a lot of the times and you can protect yourself from incoming shots, this tank is going to just rack up the damage and the kills, because, you know, with this rate of fire, with this alpha damage, there are not a lot of tanks that can stay in front of you for a very long time and survive. Unless they have very potent armor like the E100 or the Mouse, but at the same time you're going to have more than enough penetration with the heat shells to even clear these guys out of their positions. I think it's a thing of beauty to have this kind of penetration, to have 249 millimeters of penetration, to have a gun that you usually only have on a tier 10 heavy tank. And it's mounted on a tier 9 medium tank. That pretty much is pretty impressive. We're using a high explosive shell right there to finish off the Scorpion G. We bounce a shell from the Scorpion G as well, APCR on the upper plate of the hull because of the angle that we had. And we finally finish off the game with 5,723 damage dealt, about 1,200 damage balanced, and 1,600 damage assisted. So pretty damn good game, and a pretty damn good vehicle that you can play. So we're going to move on to the other game, another game where the strength of this tank can be seen quite clearly. I just have to find it. It's somewhere. I've played this tank so often in the last couple of days, so there are a lot of games that I have to watch through to find the perfect one. So the second gameplay I wanted to show you guys is where this tank really lives in. This is the place where the WZ-120 feels the most comfortable in, and it's actually being the aggressive pusher that's in your face and that's brawling so close that you really have to aim for the cupola or the lower plate. And I'm gonna show you just how capable this tank is just in this little cove right here. C9, this is a place where usually the fast vehicles go into, and where they start to brawl and try to take certain positions. And right here you're gonna see a very bullshit shot that goes right into the cupola, where I was quite happy that that one hit. But we have one of the best tier 9 tanks on the other side, and it's a Tortoise. Now, this Tortoise obviously does not want us to be in this place, and he has a very big problem, and that is his cupola. That cupola on top, or commander's hatch, however you want to call it, is a pretty damn big target. And even though they have buffed it quite a bit, we should not have any troubles going through it with 200 and 49 millimeters of penetration, or even the 340 millimeters of penetration with the heat shells. But I decided to go against that, even though this tortoise is firing APCR. And you can see that the enemy team is not very happy with us being in this position, because we can basically just go hull down here and let our turret take the brunt of the incoming heat. Everyone is now very aggressively trying to push us, because they are quite a bit annoyed by the very impressive armor that this tank does have. And unfortunately for us, they are going to be cresting over the ridgeline in just a second. This tortoise really wants us dead. Same with the King Tiger. And as soon as one of them is going to start coming over the crest, we're going to have a problem, because everyone else is going to come over as well. So as you can see, they're focusing their fire on me because they want to take me out of the game as quick as possible. We managed to just survive, and we bounced the final shot from the Sharpfoot 204, and now we're desperately trying to hide behind this renegade, and we're trying to just knock out the tortoise. But we managed to survive that, got 3 kills, 3,600 damage, and some very nice assistance damage with that. The enemy team just completely lost their cool over here, and they were just focused on taking us out of the game, because our position right there was just way too strong for them. And this is what the WZ-120 can do so perfectly, and also the 121 can do it quite awesomely as well. What you can see right here is one of the worst sides of the vehicle, which is the lack of gun depression. I didn't want to go over the ridgeline because I knew that the Object 430 was just going to wait for me to come over the ridgeline to shoot me, because I'm a low HP vehicle. Turns out I don't have enough gun depression to actually punish the Object 430, and in the end I have to watch as our team devours that Object 430. Like, that is the beauty of this tank, and also at the same time one of the most saddest, or less beautiful parts of the vehicle itself, where you notice that you don't have the gun depression to do some damage. But we at least managed to hit the Scorpion G for 435 damage, which was quite impressive. So yeah, basically, what can I say about the WZ-120? I love this tank. This tank is incredible amounts of fun. There's a reason why I love the T-34-3, and the T-34-3 is one of my favorite tier 8 premium medium tanks. And I think the T-34-3 just has the advantage of having the gun depression that we are sorely lacking on the WZ-120. But that doesn't hold this tank back completely. It just kind of gives you an additional challenge that you have to surpass if you want to be very successful on the WZ-120. You have to know where to go. You have to know the limitations of your vehicle. And I thought that that angle right there, when we were holding that position, that was the best part you'll see on the WZ-120, because we were able to utilize the DPM, we were able to utilize the turret armor, at least as long as they were not hitting the weak spots on the turret. But as soon as they started, loading the gold with the tortoise, especially, we had a little bit of a problem holding off the APCR shells from going through our turret, but we still held up quite nicely, in my opinion. So right now we're just trying to clean up. There's a T-10 coming in, and I'm scared that he's just gonna roll around. Unfortunately, this time around we're unable to really put a nice snapshot into him, but we're still hoping that the next one is going to be successful, but unfortunately it is not the case. Still, we knock out the what is it called? I just forgot its name. The Udis 3, and now we have an Object 705 who wants to knock us out of this game. There is still some damage to be had, at least about 2,000 damage with both of these vehicles. I'm making a very big misplay right here. I waited for the Object 705 to come around the corner, and you have to keep in mind this tank has 440 alpha damage. So I rolled extremely low with 395 because he still had 2% of HP left, 40 HP, and we weren't able to knock him out. But unfortunately, you know, if we had the right kind of alpha damage of 440 right there, we would have knocked out the Object 705 and maybe still had another shot in the WZ-114. This leaves us now at 4,926 damage dealt in about 7 minutes, 3,000 damage almost blocked, 1,832 damage assisted, so pretty good stats overall. So let's talk a little bit about the WZ-120. Is this a valuable tank at tier 9? Is this a tank you should grind for? Do you like medium tanks? Do you like tanks with high alpha damage? This is the tank for you. Do you really need 12 degrees of gun depression? Are you one of the players that needs to have 12 degrees of gun depression at least? This is not a tank that you should be playing. If you hate the fact that you don't have any gun depression, this is a vehicle or a line that I would stay clear of very, very much so, because it's not going to get better. The gun depression is just not something that comes with the Chinese medium tanks. But if you can look past that, this is a tank that fully upgraded, once it's fully upgraded, is a vehicle for everyone. If you don't have the patience, to unlock all of the things, I would just skip ahead, go to the 121, which is similar in playstyle, but it's just a different kind of vehicle because it's a tier 10. At tier 9, with the WZ-120, you get to face these tier 8 and tier 9 vehicles, where having this kind of alpha is something very special. At tier 10, on the other hand, having this alpha is no longer as special as it is at tier 9, and thus you kind of are missing out on a very fun tank. Other than that, an incredible vehicle, a vehicle that is so much fun and that I would really recommend to all of you guys. So yeah, if you have the time, if you are willing to grind the Chinese medium tank line and you didn't really like the tier 8, maybe you didn't enjoy the tier 7 because it went away from the alpha damage, the tier 9 is probably going to be one of your favorites if you can work with the 3 degrees of gun depression. I'm not the very best player in the world, but I can make it work. I think you guys can make it work too. Just look where you're going. Just, you know, sometimes you have to keep in mind that certain positions that other medium tanks can go are not places you should be going to. But I think this is a very, very nice tank at tier 9. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this review. As always, comment, like, and subscribe, and I see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one, and peace out.